Hello, my name is Claire, and I'm 30 years old. I'm a United States Air Force fighter pilot, a title I earned through sweat, sacrifice, discipline, and a stubborn belief that I could rise above the limits people placed on me. But if you ask me where my first battle began, it wasn't in the sky. It began inside my own home, long before I ever touched the controls of an aircraft. I grew up in a small town in Colorado, the kind where neighbors knew everything about each other, and dreams bigger than the mountains were often treated like a joke. My mother, Karen, was the only reason I ever believed I could be something more. She used to say, "Claire, the sky isn't the limit for you, it's just the beginning." Her soft, steady voice was like a shield around me. But my father, Richard, he was the storm that constantly tried to break it. He never raised a hand on me. His weapon was his words. Sharp, cold, precise. The kind that don't bruise the skin but scar the heart. I still remember the first time I said I wanted to be a pilot. I was 9. My mother smiled proudly, but my father snorted and turned away as if I'd said something shameful. Pilot? Don't be ridiculous, he muttered. You're not strong enough for that. And besides, women don't belong in cockpits. Pick something realistic. Realistic. That word followed me through my childhood like a shadow. Every school achievement I brought home, every medal, every certificate, he brushed them aside. It's nothing special, he'd say. These things don't matter in real life. And every time he did, I felt myself shrinking. I learned to swallow my hurt, to hide my disappointment, and to quietly store every insult in a place deep inside me where even I didn't dare look too often. My mother tried to protect me. She'd stand up for me, argue with him, tell him he was being unfair. But he was a man convinced that life had cheated him, and he took that bitterness out on the two people who deserved it the least. Still, I held on to my dream. When he refused to take me to an air show, my mother saved up money from her part-time job, bought 2 tickets, and drove 4 hours just to let me see the jets. I remember standing there, watching them cut through the sky with thunder in their wings, and I whispered to myself, one day, that will be me. But the price of dreaming in that house was high. My father told relatives I was wasting my life, told neighbors I was disobedient, told anyone who listened that I was headed nowhere. And slowly, those words seeped into me, shaping the way I saw myself. Even years later, even in uniform, even after earning my wings, a small part of me still felt like that little girl being told she wasn't enough. I didn't know then that the man who doubted me the most would one day become the reason I almost lost everything I had ever worked for. When I turned 18, I packed my bags quietly at dawn. My mother stood by the doorway, her eyes shining with tears she tried to hide, whispering blessings under her breath. My father didn't even wake up to say goodbye. Maybe that hurt should have stopped me, but instead it fueled me. I left with one belief burning in my chest. If I stayed, I'd become the version of myself he kept insisting I was. If I left, maybe I could finally become me. The United States Air Force Academy was nothing like the world I came from. It was sharp edges, flawless routines, strict discipline, and an unspoken rule that you either rose above your limits or you broke under them. But for the first time in my life, the expectations around me didn't feel like chains, they felt like a challenge. And challenges, I knew how to fight. Every morning began before the sun, with miles of running, conditioning drills, and hours of academic work. I still remember the first time I stepped into a simulator. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from awe. The cockpit lights glowed softly, the panels blinking like a heartbeat, and I thought, this is home. This is where I belong. Of course, it wasn't easy. I failed my first precision landing simulation. My instructor pulled me aside afterward, expecting frustration or excuses, but I simply nodded, breathed, and asked, "Can I try again?" He looked at me for a long second, then said something I'd never heard in my house growing up. "You've got potential, Claire. Real potential." Those words changed everything. It was at the academy that I met Hannah, sharp-minded, fearless, and the only person I've ever seen drink 3 cups of black coffee before sunrise and still complain she was tired. We trained together, pushed each other, competed fiercely, and celebrated every milestone like sisters. She used to say, "You carry your pain like armor. One day it'll make you unstoppable." At the time, I laughed it off. Now I realize she was right. When I finally earned my wings and stepped onto the flight line for the first time, the roar of the engines drowned out every insult my father ever threw at me. My heart pounded against my ribcage as I climbed into the cockpit of the jet that would define my life. The canopy closed, sealing me inside a world where no one could tell me I wasn't enough. Up there, above the clouds, I wasn't the girl Richard tried to break. I wasn't the child made small by words. I was a pilot, strong, skilled, trusted. Flying became more than a career. It became the proof of every battle I fought inside myself. It became the dream my mother nurtured, the future my father said I could never have, and the only place where I felt completely, undeniably alive. I didn't know then how quickly dreams can turn into nightmares, and how the sky that gave me freedom could be taken away with a single phone call. My first deployment felt like crossing a line I had been preparing for my entire life. The moment my boots touched the tarmac overseas, I felt a mixture of fear, pride, and something deeper. The realization that I was finally standing in a world my father always said I wasn't strong enough for. But I was there. I had made it. And I was ready. Those first missions were nothing glamorous like people imagine. They were long hours, endless briefings, unpredictable weather, and the constant hum of responsibility in my ears. Every time I strapped into my jet, I felt the weight of lives depending on us, the pilots, the crew, the entire squadron. But in that pressure, I found clarity. Up there, I wasn't Claire, the daughter, who was always a disappointment. I was Lieutenant Claire, the pilot they trusted to bring her aircraft and her team home. I remember one mission in particular. A storm rolled in over the mountains, cutting visibility down to almost nothing. Another aircraft in our formation reported a systems glitch, and panic rippled through the radio channels. Hannah's voice came through steady, guiding them through diagnostics, while I maintained formation in conditions that felt like flying blind. When we landed safely, Colonel Bennett pulled me aside. "Outstanding work today," he said. "Calm under pressure. That's what makes a real fighter pilot." It was the kind of praise I had spent my whole childhood waiting to hear, not from him, but from someone. Anyone. And yet, even as the squadron began recognizing my strengths, even as my reputation grew, I still carried the same unspoken ache, that no matter how high I flew, my father would never look up. Each deployment added layers to me: resilience, experience, scars I didn't talk about, and pride I tried to share back home. I would call my mother whenever I could. She always sounded relieved, like my voice alone pulled her heart back together. But when she passed the phone to Richard, it felt like hitting a wall. "How long are you going to stay in this phase?" he once said. "You're wasting your prime years. No family, no stability. What do you even gain from risking your life up there?" What did I gain? Purpose. Honor. A sense of belonging I had never found under his roof. But trying to explain that to him was like speaking another language. He simply didn't hear me, or maybe he chose not to. Meanwhile, my squadron became the family I didn't have. They celebrated my first commendation, cheered when I completed a challenging training cycle, and treated my successes like they were their own. Hannah would joke, "If your dad won't brag about you, don't worry. I'll do it twice as much." She meant it too. But no matter how respected I became, no matter how many missions I flew, there was always this quiet part of me wondering why the people who barely knew me could see my worth, while the man who raised me never even tried. I didn't realize then that the distance between us was about to turn into damage far deeper than emotional wounds, and that the hand that never clapped for me would soon be the same hand that tore my entire life apart. The day I received the message from headquarters announcing I had been selected as Pilot of the Year, I sat frozen in the middle of the squadron hallway, staring at the screen until the letters blurred. For a moment, everything around me, the chatter, the footsteps, the mechanical hum, disappeared. All I could hear was my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Pilot of the Year.
Me, Claire.
The girl who grew up being told she wasn't enough had just earned one of the highest honors a fighter pilot could receive. Hannah found me still staring, shocked into silence. She grabbed my shoulders. "Claire, you did it. Do you realize how huge this is?" She was crying before I was. Colonel Bennett came out of his office, shook my hand firmly, and said words I know I'll never forget. "Lieutenant, you've become the kind of pilot others study. You've earned this with grit and excellence." For the first time in years, I felt like the world finally saw me, the real me, not the version my father painted. The award ceremony was scheduled 2 weeks later, a formal event on base with officers, families, and community guests. Hannah insisted I invite my parents. I hesitated, but deep down a small part of me hoped that this might be the moment my father would finally see me. Really see me. Maybe pride would replace the constant criticism. Maybe he would say something a father was supposed to say. My mother, Karen, agreed to come immediately. "Your father will go too," she said softly. "Just don't expect too much." I told her I wasn't, but the truth was, I was expecting everything. When the evening arrived, I wore my dress uniform, polished until it shone. The hall glittered with lights and flags. My name was displayed on the screen. Officers greeted me warmly. Cameras flashed, and the applause felt like waves lifting me higher. For once, I allowed myself to enjoy it. Then I saw my parents enter. My mother smiled proudly. Her eyes sparkled with joy. But my father, Richard, walked in with the same cold, unimpressed expression he always carried, the one that could dim any room. Still, I reminded myself to stay hopeful. Maybe today would be different. When my name was called, the applause was deafening. I stepped on stage, received the award, and for the first time, allowed myself to search the crowd for my father's reaction. He was shaking his head. And then, before I could even step away from the podium, Richard stood up. "Excuse me," he called out loudly. The room fell silent. My heart stopped. "I just want to say," he paused, then let out a laugh that sliced through me. "This award doesn't mean anything. These things are political. My daughter didn't earn this. She must have gotten help. Or pity." A ripple of shock washed through the hall. Someone whispered, "Is he serious?" Colonel Bennett moved forward, ready to intervene, but the damage was already done. My knees trembled. My face burned. I felt every eye on me, not admiring now, but confused, sympathetic, horrified. My mother quietly begged him to sit down, but he brushed her hand away. He wasn't done. She should be settling down, living a real life instead of pretending to be some kind of hero. Pretending. The word felt like a blade. I stood frozen, unable to breathe, unable to speak. All the pride I felt moments earlier drained out of me like someone had opened a vein. Even after he finally sat, the silence he left behind felt louder than his accusations. That night, as I walked off stage with my award in my hand, it didn't feel like a victory anymore. It felt like a wound, one delivered not by enemy fire, but by the man I had once prayed would be proud of me. 2 weeks after the ceremony, I was back to flying schedules, paperwork, and simulator blocks, trying my best to pretend that my father's public humiliation hadn't carved something permanent into me. My squadron tried to treat me normally. Hannah stuck by my side like a shadow. Colonel Bennett checked on me more often than usual. But no matter how much support I had, something inside me felt cracked. Still, I kept moving. That's what pilots do. We fly through turbulence. We don't stop because of it. One quiet afternoon, while I was reviewing maintenance logs, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I answered without thinking. "Lieutenant Claire?" "Yes, this is she." "This is Officer Daniels from Military Finance Services. I'm calling regarding your past due payments on your VA-backed personal loan." For a moment, I didn't understand the words. "My what?" "Your loan, ma'am. You're 3 months behind. We've attempted to contact you several times." I felt my blood turn cold. I never took out a loan. There was a pause. Papers shuffled. "Ma'am, we have your full application on record, signed electronically, with your social security number, service number, and deployment details. Are you saying this isn't your signature? My heart slammed against my ribs. Deployment details? Service number? These weren't things a random scammer could guess. Only someone close would know such personal, classified pieces of my life. I drove straight to finance, barely able to feel my hands on the steering wheel. Officer Daniels pulled up my file. There it was. A loan worth thousands of dollars. Under my name. My information. My identity. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. Someone stole my identity, I whispered. But deep inside, a sickening thought crawled up, a thought so disturbing I pushed it away immediately. No, he wouldn't. He couldn't. But the list of people who knew this information was short. Very short. Daniels printed the documents for me. As soon as I held the papers in my hands, my stomach dropped. The signature, it looked almost like mine. Almost. Not quite. But close enough to fool someone who didn't know me. He pointed to the attached verification files. These documents were uploaded from a home IP address in your hometown. Does that help identify who might have done this? The room spun. Home. My hometown. Where my parents lived. I forced myself to stand, to breathe, to keep my voice steady. Thank you. I managed. I'll take it from here. But things didn't stop there. 2 days later, I received a formal notice from the Department of Defense. Due to financial irregularities and defaulted debt, your security clearance has been temporarily suspended. Until further notice, you are grounded. Grounded. The word hit harder than any missile I'd ever trained to evade. My jets, my missions, my life, my identity, gone in one sentence. As I read the notice, my knees gave out. Hannah caught me before I hit the floor. Colonel Bennett walked in moments later, his expression torn between anger and helplessness. Claire will get to the bottom of this, he said quietly. But even he couldn't hide what this meant. A fighter pilot without clearance is like a bird with broken wings. And as I stared at the suspension notice, only one question echoed through me. Who hated me enough to take away the sky I fought so hard to claim? Deep down, I already knew the answer. I just wasn't ready to accept it. The morning after my clearance was officially suspended felt unreal, like waking up inside someone else's nightmare. I arrived on base in uniform, but for the first time since earning my wings, I didn't head toward the flight line. Instead, I walked toward the administrative building, the place pilots avoid unless absolutely necessary. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if gravity had suddenly learned my name. People nodded politely as I passed, but their eyes carried the same quiet sympathy, the kind reserved for someone who suffered a loss. And I had. A loss deeper than most people could ever understand. When a pilot loses their clearance, it isn't just paperwork. It's identity. It's purpose. It's the air being sucked out of a life built around the sky. Colonel Bennett called me into his office as soon as I arrived. His uniform was crisp, his posture firm as always, but his eyes softened the moment he looked at me. That made it worse somehow. I didn't want pity from the man I respected more than anyone in command. Claire, have a seat, he said gently. I remained standing. Sir, there has to be a mistake. My record is clean. My finances have never. He raised a hand. I know. Everyone who has ever worked with you knows that. He sighed. But when a federal financial discrepancy appears, the Air Force doesn't have a choice. We're bound by protocol. That word again, protocol. A word that kept the military strong, and right now was tearing my life apart. He continued, until this investigation is closed, you're grounded. No flying, no classified briefings, no operational access. A piece of me shattered. I managed to ask, for how long? He didn't answer immediately. That silence said everything. It could be weeks, months, sometimes years. Sir, is there anything I can do? You can cooperate with the FOC and provide all documentation they request, he said. And Claire, he paused, choosing his words carefully. You are one of the finest pilots I've ever commanded. Don't let this break you. But it already had. I left his office trying to stay upright, but the corridor blurred. The sounds of jets taking off outside stabbed through me, Each engine roar felt like a reminder of what I could no longer touch. Hannah found me sitting alone on a bench near the hangar doors, staring at the runway like it was a world I no longer belonged to. She sat beside me quietly, letting the silence speak first. "You don't have to pretend with me," she finally whispered. I swallowed hard. "It feels like someone ripped the sky out of my hands." She nodded, because they did. We both knew this wasn't a simple financial error. Someone did this intentionally, deliberately, with full knowledge of what it would cost me. Later that night, when I returned to my empty apartment, I placed my flight helmet on the table and just stared at it. The reflection of the ceiling light curved across its glossy surface, a surface now untouched by missions, untouched by purpose. I pressed my hand against it and felt the weight of a truth I didn't want to accept. Someone stole my wings. And the worst part was the person who had the access and motive to do this was someone I shared blood with. The next morning, I sat outside the FOC office, a place usually reserved for cases involving intelligence breaches, financial crimes, or internal misconduct. I never imagined I'd be here as anything other than a witness, and certainly not as a victim. My stomach tightened as I waited, the hum of fluorescent lights above me mixing with a quiet clicking of keyboards behind the glass wall. "Lieutenant Claire?" I looked up to see a tall, sharp-eyed man in a dark suit. His badge read, Special Agent Miller, the investigator assigned to my case. "Come in," he said. "We need to talk." Inside, the room felt colder than it looked. Miller set a thick folder on the table, my name printed across the top. Seeing it there, in the context of a federal investigation, sent a fresh wave of dread through me. "Lieutenant," he began, "we're treating your case as identity theft tied to a fraudulent VA loan. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need complete honesty. Anything you remember, no matter how small, could help." I nodded. My voice felt stuck somewhere inside my chest. He opened the folder. "First, have you ever shared your social security number, service number, or deployment dates with anyone outside official channels?" I shook my head. "Never. Those details are classified. I'm not careless with them." "Good," he said. "Now, have you ever granted anyone power of attorney? A family member, maybe?" Again, I shook my head. "No. Nothing like that." Miller leaned back slightly, studying my face. "Lieutenant, fraud like this isn't random. The person behind it knew specific information, things only someone close to you would have." That sentence hit me like a punch to the chest. I looked away, focusing on a small crack in the wall, willing my voice not to break. "I already have someone in mind," I whispered. "Your father?" he asked calmly. I froze. I hadn't said the name. I hadn't even said the word he. But somehow, Miller saw through me anyway. He continued, "The loan application was submitted from a residential IP address in your hometown. The profile was created using identifiable details, including your mother's maiden name and your high school records. Those aren't things a stranger would know." My heart sank. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was evidence. Miller slid a document toward me. "Take a look at the digital signature on the loan file. Tell me if anything looks familiar." My breath caught. The signature was a rough imitation of mine, the curve in the C, the slant of the L. Wrong enough to be forged, but right enough to fool an automated system. I felt sick. Miller's voice softened. "Claire, I've seen a lot of cases. Family fraud is more common than you think. It doesn't make it hurt any less." Family fraud. The words felt dirty, shameful, like they branded me. I swallowed hard. "What happens now?" "We continue the investigation," he said. "I'll pull bank logs, IP activity, and device fingerprints. Once we have confirmation, we'll move toward federal charges." "Federal charges," I repeated quietly. "Against my own father." As I walked out of the office, the cold air outside hit me like a slap. My mind kept cycling through memories, my father's bitter tone, his humiliation at the ceremony, his lifelong belief that I wasn't enough. Maybe this had always been building, maybe he had been waiting for the moment he could finally break me completely. But something else stirred inside me too, not just pain. Anger. A fire. because now the trail was clear. Every breadcrumb of evidence, every digital footprint, every forged detail, it all led home. I didn't tell my mother I was coming. I didn't tell anyone. I drove straight to my hometown with nothing but the thick of Fosi evidence folder sitting in the passenger seat, every page inside it a knife pointing toward the one man I had spent my whole life trying to please. The closer I got to the house I grew up in, the heavier the air felt, like the truth itself was pulling me down. When I parked outside, memories came rushing back, riding my bike in the driveway, sitting on the porch with my mother, hearing my father's voice echoing through the walls, sometimes calm, sometimes cruel. I stepped out of the car with trembling hands. My father opened the door before I even knocked, as if he'd been watching through the curtains. "Claire," he said flatly. No warmth. No surprise. Just my name spoken like an inconvenience. I walked past him without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. He closed the door behind us. "If this is about your little ceremony incident," he scoffed, "I already told your mother. This isn't about the ceremony." My voice cracked through the room like a blade. He turned toward me, eyebrows raised. "Then what is it?" I took the folder from my bag and dropped it on the table between us. The papers fanned out loan documents, digital logs, forged signatures, IP addresses. Proof. Every piece of it. "I know," I said quietly. He didn't even pretend not to understand what I meant. For a moment he said nothing. His face didn't change. No guilt. No shock. Not even fear. Just a slow, dismissive shrug. "So what?" he finally replied. My chest tightened. "So what? You stole my identity, Dad. You used my service number, my social, my deployment orders. You took out a federal loan in my name. And," he said it so casually that for a second, I wondered if I was dreaming. I stepped closer. "Because of you, my security clearance is suspended. I'm grounded. I might lose my career, everything I worked for." He cut me off with a laugh. A laugh so cold it sliced straight into my bones. "Good," he said. "Maybe now you'll stop playing war hero and start living a real life." I stared at him, stunned into silence. He continued, "You think flying jets makes you someone? It's pointless. A dead-end dream. I took the loan because I needed it. Because you owe me. After everything I put into raising you, I deserved something back." "You didn't raise me," I whispered. "You tore me down." He waved his hand dismissively. "You were always too dramatic. Besides, I didn't think they'd actually suspend you. And if they did, maybe it's for the best. You're 30 years old, Claire. No husband. No kids. No real future. Maybe losing this pilot fantasy will bring you back to reality." Pilot fantasy. The words hit harder than every insult he'd ever thrown at me, because now I saw the truth behind them. He didn't accidentally hurt me. He didn't lash out in anger. He wanted this. He wanted me grounded. He wanted me small. He wanted me trapped in the life he thought I deserved. The life that made sense to him. "Dad," I whispered, trembling with a mix of heartbreak and fury, "you didn't just betray me. You destroyed everything I built." He looked me straight in the eyes. "I didn't destroy anything," he said calmly. "I corrected a mistake." There it was. His cruel truth. The truth that finally shattered the last fragile hope I had ever held for him. I turned away before he could see the tears burning in my eyes, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just his disappointed daughter. I was the woman who would make sure he faced justice for what he had done. The weeks leading up to the trial moved in slow, heavy waves. Each day another reminder that I wasn't flying, wasn't training, wasn't living the life I had bled for. But something inside me had shifted the moment I walked out of my parents' house. The fear that once held me hostage had turned into something sharp, steady, and unbreakable. I wasn't fighting for approval anymore. I was fighting for justice. Jonathan Reed, my JAG lawyer, became my anchor. Calm, intelligent, and impossibly patient, he walked me through every step. "Claire," he told me the night before the hearing, "this isn't just a financial crime. It's identity theft, federal fraud, and intentional abuse of a service member's personal information. The law is on your side. Don't lose focus. His confidence steadied my nerves. Even so, when I stepped into the federal courthouse that morning, my heart thudded so hard I felt it in my throat. Hannah squeezed my hand before we entered. "I'm right here," she whispered. "You're not facing this alone." The courtroom was cool and quiet, the kind of silence that feels like it's waiting to witness something irreversible. My mother sat in the second row, her face pale with heartbreak. She hadn't spoken to my father since the confrontation. When I looked at her, she mouthed, "I'm proud of you." It nearly broke me. Richard entered moments later escorted by federal officers. He wore no handcuffs. The charges allowed him supervised mobility, but the sight of him in that room felt unreal. He didn't look at me. Not once. He simply took his seat, chin raised stubbornly, as if he were the victim of some great injustice. Agent Miller took the stand first. His testimony was clean, professional, and devastating. He explained how the IP addresses matched my father's home network, how the digital signatures traced back to his devices, how bank logs confirmed the funds were wired into an account only he controlled. Then he showed the jury the final, irrefutable proof, the text message Richard sent to a friend complaining about needing the money and calling me an ungrateful child who owes me. My stomach twisted, but I stayed strong. When it was Jonathan's turn, he presented my military records, flawless service, commendations, years of sacrifice and discipline, painting a clear contrast between my integrity and my father's deliberate betrayal. He spoke firmly. This wasn't a mistake. This was a calculated choice to exploit a daughter's identity and sacrifice for personal gain, and it jeopardized her career, her clearance, and her safety. My father was finally asked to speak. For a moment, I held my breath, hoping, just hoping, he would show remorse. Instead, he stood up and said, "I don't regret anything. She ruined her own life chasing nonsense. I only did what any father should do, take control." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge's face hardened. The verdict didn't take long. Guilty on all counts. Identity theft, federal loan fraud, unauthorized use of military credentials, intentional harm to a service member's clearance. My father was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison with mandatory restitution. As the gavel struck, something inside me released, a breath I'd been holding for years.
Not joy.
Not revenge. Just freedom. The kind that comes when the truth finally wins. My mother sobbed quietly. Hannah wrapped her arm around me. Jonathan nodded with a soft, proud smile. And for the first time in my life, I walked away from my father without the weight of his voice on my back. Justice had spoken, and it had spoken loudly. 2 months after the trial, I returned to base for what felt like the 100th interview, the 100th review, the 100th attempt to reclaim the part of me that had been stolen. This time, the room felt different. Lighter. Like the walls themselves were no longer pressing in on me. Colonel Bennett stood beside the AFOSI panel as they reviewed the final documents. Agent Miller gave a brief summary confirming the case was closed, the fraud proven, the perpetrator convicted. Every sentence he spoke lifted a weight I'd carried for far too long. Finally, the lead officer looked up at me. "Lieutenant Clare, your security clearance is fully restored. Effective immediately." The words hit me so hard my breath caught. For a moment, I just stood there, staring, unable to even blink. Hannah let out a quiet cheer behind me. Colonel Bennett smiled, a real, full smile I didn't think his disciplined face was capable of. "Welcome back, Lieutenant," he said. "The flight line hasn't been the same without you." I swallowed the lump in my throat and managed, "Thank you, sir." But the moment didn't fully settle in until he placed something in my hands, my flight badge, polished, shining, waiting. My wings. The symbol of everything I had fought for. Everything I had bled for. Everything I almost lost because of the man who should have protected me. I stared at them for a long, trembling moment. Then I pinned them back onto my uniform. It felt like breathing again. The first time I walked back onto the flight line, the sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the jets parked in perfect formation. The engines hummed in the distance, that familiar vibration that lived somewhere inside my bones. A symphony I had missed more than anything. Hannah jogged up beside me, grinning. "Ready to get your wings dirty again?" I laughed, really laughed. "I've been ready since the day they took them from me." She bumped my shoulder. "Let's go remind the sky who you are." When I climbed into the cockpit again, my fingers hesitated over the controls for just a second, not out of fear, but reverence. Coming back to this seat felt like returning to the home I had been exiled from. The canopy closed. The engine roared to life. The ground trembled beneath me. And suddenly, I was whole again. As the jet lifted off, the world fell away beneath me, houses shrinking, roads disappearing, clouds rising toward me like open arms. Tears blurred my vision. Not of sadness. Not anymore. But of healing. Up here, no one could reach me. Not his words. Not his cruelty. Not his betrayal. My father had taken everything he could from me. My peace, my pride, my dreams. But he failed to take the one thing he wanted most. My wings. Because the sky never belonged to him. It was always mine. When I broke through the cloud line and felt the sunlight pour across the nose of my jet, a single truth settled into my chest with the quietness of certainty. Sometimes the enemy you fear the most is the one inside your own home, but the victory that follows is the kind that defines you forever. And as I leveled off into that endless blue, I whispered to myself, "I'm back." If you connected with this story, make sure to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps these stories reach more people. And if you enjoy powerful, emotional narratives like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories every week. Thank you for watching.